Welcome everybody. I'm Sarah Worthington. I'm a Pro-Director at the LSE and the Chair of the Arts Committee. So it's my don't shout, is the idea. We're going to start formally and then I am going to sit down and we'll try and have a conversation. But I want to say a few words to you before we start the conversation part of tonight's event. We're very excited here at the LSE to be running the LSE's first ever literary festival. It's a packed weekend of free events which celebrate, in one sense, the completion of this new academic building, and in another sense, an exploration of the interaction between the arts and the social sciences. I think the link between the arts and the social sciences has quite a long history at the LSE. You might say it started when the LSE started, perhaps inspired by George Bernard Shaw, who was one of the LSE's famous founders. And we've now taken up that idea and pursued it as part of the LSE's expanding arts programme. So I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you tonight. Welcome to the LSE and welcome to the start of the literary weekend. Now you've probably picked up from the programme that we're not quite the launch event. That happens in this theatre at 8 o'clock. I think we're the warm-up event. So the pressure is on us a little bit to set the tone. This is ReaLITy, creative responses to social realities. And it marks the culmination of a creative writing competition for London schools. That may seem only very loosely related to the LSE's usual areas of interest, but in fact communication of ideas is at the heart of what the LSE does, and particularly responses to contemporary social issues. So we hoped that our engagement with the schools might provide an opportunity for teenagers and their families and their friends to gain some sort of insight into what we do, and perhaps encourage them, and I don't just mean the teenagers, encourage them to pursue further study, perhaps at the LSE. It's true we wanted that as part of what we're doing tonight, but we very seriously want you to consider the questions we're asking in this literary festival. Is literature relevant today? Can it make a difference? So in the next hour, or a little bit less since we started late, we're going to have a panel discussion that looks at how authors, especially authors for teenage readers, find inspiration in contemporary social issues. Perhaps they don't, perhaps they do. How they deal with social issues, how they go about their process of authorship, what they expect us, the reader, to gain from their writings, and so on. At the end of our conversation, we'll have the prize giving for the ReaLITy competition. And I'm not trying to build Oscar-type suspense. It's just where it fits. Our panel includes popular and award-winning authors who've dealt with topics as wide-ranging as Ethiopian street children and Nazi Germany, and done so using a variety of vehicles, some using ReaLITy, some comedy, some pure fantasy. I know you were probably all expecting this session to be chaired by Peter Florence, the director of the Hay Festivals in Wales, Colombia, Spain, Lebanon, Ireland and Kenya. He's unable to be with us for family reasons, but he sends his best wishes and hopes for success with this event. So you have me as a rather novice understudy taking his place. I'm sorry that that's probably going to be a little disappointing for some of you, but we've still got our authors. And I want to say something about each of them before I open the floor to them and to you for our conversation. I'll start on my right, Meg Rosoff. Meg Rosoff has had, it seems to me, about 3 or 4 careers in publishing and advertising before bursting onto the literary scene in 2004. With one of the most highly claimed debut novels of recent years. How I Live Now won the Guardian and Brantford Bowes Awards was shortlisted for the Orange Prize for New Fiction, as well as for the Whitbread, and has sold over 200,000 copies in the UK alone. Speaking as an academic, that's the kind of sales that you only dream of. Just in Case, second of her books, published in 2006, was shortlisted for the Costa Book Award and won the prestigious Carnegie Mellon in 2007. She moved from New York to London in 1989, and she lives here with her husband and her daughter. Next to her is Maurice Gleitzman, an award-winning children's author who I know you will all have heard of, celebrated for his difficulty to wrap difficult issues within easily accessible books. So he's dealt with AIDS and cancer and asylum seekers and immigration, and most recently the Holocaust, of course, once and again in his latest novel, Then. He began his career as a promotions writer and then wrote comedy scripts for the Norman Gunston Show until his first novel for children, Other Facts of Life, was published in 1985, followed by 2 Weeks with the Queen, for which he won the Children's Book Award. He's written more than 27 books for children. And then next to him, Anthony McGowan. Before turning to full-time writing, Anthony McGowan gained a PhD in philosophy, worked as a nightclub bouncer, an Open University tutor, a journalist, a civil servant. Clearly, it's perfect training for an aspiring author, because in 2006 he won the Teenage Book Trust Prize for Henry Tumour, which was also shortlisted for the Sheffield Children's Book Award, the Lancashire Children's Book of the Year Award, the Redbridge Teenage Book Award, and the Catalyst Award. And his new and highly controversial book, The Knife That Killed Me, or The Knife What Killed Me, I'm not sure which it is, was released last year. Next to him, we have Elizabeth Laird. She's published many books for all ages and has won and been shortlisted for many prestigious awards. I'm picking on some of those books. In 2008, Crusade was shortlisted for the Costa Children's Book of the Year and the Silip Carnegie Medal. Jake's Tower was shortlisted for the Carnegie Medal and the Guardian Children's Fiction Prize. And in 2004, The Garbage King won the Scottish Arts Council Book Prize. Elizabeth has spent many years living and working abroad, including long spells in Lebanon, Ethiopia, and India, and you can see that in her work. She and her husband now divide their time between London and Edinburgh. And then finally, Patrick Ness. He's an American who now lives in England after a childhood spent travelling abroad, including, so I'm told, a spell in Hawaii at the same time as Barack Obama. That makes you very famous. He had his first story published in Genre magazine in 1997 and has published 2 books for adults, a novel called The Crash of Hennington and a short story collection called Topics About Which I Know Nothing. And then his first book for teenagers, The Knife of Never Letting Go, won the 2008 Book Trust Teenage Prize in November last year and the Guardian Children's Fiction Prize. So, we've got some pretty esteemed authors in our presence. And what I want to do is have a conversation with them where I try and ask them some of the sorts of questions that I imagine you want to ask them. But then I want to leave quite a lot of time for you to do the asking. So at the beginning we just want to kick off trying to find a little more about the authors, and then it will be over to you to have a conversation with them. Now, we might have to pull in, well, the authors might have to pull in a bit, but I think the acoustics here are pretty good. Can you hear me up at the back? Yes. Okay. I haven't written any novels, but yes. I think everybody thinks that they could write a novel. And everybody wants to know what makes a novelist special. We want to know something about
their private workings, I suppose, how they think about things. So I want to ask perhaps each of the authors here to tell us something a bit more personal than you can get from the dust cover of a novel about themselves. This is a bit like being in a tutorial, and typically you pick the person on your left if you're left-handed and the person on your right if you're right-handed. I'm left-handed, so Morris.
When I was 17, I was a university student in Canberra in Australia, needing to work part-time to pay for my studies, and one Christmas holidays I went along to a department store hoping for a bit of casual work, expecting I'd be loading parcels into cars or stacking merchandise onto shelves, and to my surprise and kind of intrigued pleasure, they said, "Right, you're Santa." It turns out their 69-year-old regular Santa had been rushed to hospital with a bowel infection, and I was handed a voluminous red suit and a false white beard made, as it turned out, from real horsehair, one of the itchiest substances on the planet. And I was installed in a grotto with several cushions stuffed up my... and children came and sat on my knee and told me what they wanted for Christmas. And I had ambitions to be a writer at this stage, so I decided to try and use this experience. And as each child came and sat on my knee and told me that they'd like a power saw or a moon bike or a year's supply of chocolate licorice or whatever it might be, I kind of looked into their eyes and I said, "Yes, but what do you really want?" And often they just looked at me as though I was an idiot, a skinny 17-year-old idiot with a high-pitched voice and very few real Santa attributes. But in their eyes, I started to get a sense of what it was that they really wanted. They wanted stories that would take them seriously, that would show them that even though the world can be a heap of crap sometimes, that even at their tender age, they have the power to go out and identify the problems in their lives and in the lives of the people they care about and in their communities, and develop strategies to try and solve those problems, and to do it with humour and a bit of anarchy and a preparedness to break rules and do illegal stuff if the cause was demanding enough. And I realised that at the end of that little experience, I actually caught an eye infection from the horsehair beard on the third day and had to be rushed to hospital. I think I saw the real Santa up the other end of the ward punching his stomach. But as I lay half blinded, I was reflecting on that little experience, and I realised that I'd also got what I wanted for Christmas, which was an inkling that there was a reason to spend my life writing for 8 and 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds. And although the eye infection has cleared up, my desire to continue doing that hasn't, and I plan to do it until finally I can resume my career as a Santa as a legitimate 69-year-old.
Thanks, Morris. Elizabeth, perhaps I can
put
on you next.
Right.
Did you always know you wanted to be an author?
Yes, I did. I did, actually. When I was very, very young, I started writing a diary, and it filled me with a burning pleasure to write this diary. I don't know why, but I was a child basically during the Stone Age, really, a long time ago, and I had these aunts called Mary, Mona, Martha, and Nancy, and and May, and they all had Victorian novels in their houses, in their spare bedrooms, with titles like Lost in London, and Drunk in the Snow, and they were about sad little children, they were Victorian weepy novels, and I used to read these novels. They used to make me cry so much I got sinusitis, a problem which has afflicted me for the rest of my life. Anyway, so I found what I liked from a novel, what I liked from a story, was to feel something. I wanted to feel something. And later on, much later on, because I didn't write my first novel till I was 40, much later on, I started to remember the death of my little brother, who died when I was 7. And I was overwhelmed with sorrow about this child. And I started to write, and it poured out of me like molten lava. And I then realised that actually, for me, the thing is that a feeling was what came first, and then I wanted to express it. But I felt also that people of your age, many of you, feel quite often quite scared because in the 1940s and 50s when I was growing up, it wasn't the same kind of world. Now, you often feel that you're living in shark-infested waters, basically, don't you? I mean, there's terrifying news on the television, and all sorts of problems, out in the street, and you have a lot of difficulties in your lives. And I think the value of stories and the value of fiction is that it helps you to have strategies for coping with with the things you may not face, but you might face one day. And you think, well, how would I behave if I was living on the streets of Addis Ababa? How would I behave if I'd been snatched away from my home in Pakistan and sent to be a camel jockey in Dubai? How would I be? And it helps you to kind of rehearse scenarios in your mind. Anyway, that's what I think. I'm going to shut up now. Sorry.
Anthony, perhaps I could move to you. Are you operating like that? So, I mean, your book, if you are operating like that...
I might have to slightly ratchet up the pretension here slightly, but I've got a slightly different approach to writing. I was a student for a long time, and if you're a student for long enough, I know lots of you out there will be at college one day, sooner or later you're going to read a book called LSE by Roland Barthes. He's a French philosopher. And in this book, he takes a story by a writer called Balzac, who was a kind of definitively realist writer, French writer. So he's a kind of writer that's supposed to describe the world the way it really is. And what Barthes does in this story is he shows that every single word in this story doesn't come from an observation of the world, but either comes from other books, or kind of cultural commonplaces, or jokes that are in the language. And it kind of destroys any hope you have of being a kind of realistic writer. Because writers use language, and language you take from other linguistic sources, from other books. And it's very hard then, and so the world is made of objects, and books are made of words, and there's a distance between those two things. And so sometimes the more you think you're being realistic and describing the world, but all you're doing is just talking about other books. And I think about it in relation to my book, The Knife That Killed Me. I mean, it might appear to be one of the more realistic books from the ones that have been written by my colleagues here. It's about knife violence in contemporary England. But I've never met a teenager who stabbed anyone or been stabbed. I read some newspaper accounts, so that's a literary source. I use a lot of my memories of being at school years ago when knives weren't really an issue. It's based partly on the Iliad by Homer. So although it appears to be a kind of realistic book, in fact it's made out of words. It's an object made out of words. So although I might reach down and try to touch the world with those words, I'm not sure I really did. I made an object made out of words. So I told you I was going to be pretentious, didn't I?
I'll explain that to you later.
What he's really saying is don't buy his book, buy our book.
What he's saying is his book's fantastic and it isn't. I've read it.
He's saying he's got a PhD in philosophy.
I warned you. So does that answer your question? I'm not sure. Was that what you were asking?
I'm just going to move left.
I think so.
No, the reason I write books is because I thought it would impress girls.
Oh yeah, well I bet it does.
Some girls.
Peg.
Yes.
Might as well disagree now.
Bring us down to earth, Meg.
Yes.
Well, I haven't read that. I don't think I would understand that book, actually, if I read it. Yes, I wrote my first novel when I was 45, and what I was doing the 25 years before that was trying to piss my parents off, I think, by working in advertising, because I was the kind of great white hope of the family, and I was supposed to be an academic and really clever in some way, and so and because I didn't go through my adolescence when I was supposed to, I started rebelling at around 20, and so by doing that I went into advertising, and I'm a Jewish American, and in some Jewish families, if you do something really awful, your parents put on black and go around saying, we have no daughter. And when I went into advertising, for about 20 years, they went around saying, we have no daughter. But eventually I had this image of my own funeral, and it was going to be the saddest event in the whole world because nobody was going to come. Because I kept getting fired from jobs in advertising for having a really, really bad attitude. And I figured nobody from advertising would come because I didn't really have any friends in advertising. And maybe a very, very few of my near friends and relations might show up to my funeral, and they would all stand around going, God, she had such a pathetic life. So it was kind of that, I think. You know, you can sort of think these things for years and years and years, that got me writing in the end. The other reason I didn't write, and I never wrote stories, or, I mean, unlike most writers, I think probably the last story I wrote before the novel I wrote was back when I was about 7 years old, and it was a horse book.
Got it with you.
I just want you to see I'm still reading horse books. And the reason I did it was because I'm not a storyteller, and I would still say I'm not a storyteller. And it's a great thing to be able to tell all you lovely, young, impressionable minds. You actually don't have to be a storyteller to write novels. You can steal plots from other people. And so that's what I did in the end. You know, I stole plots and changed them a little bit so people wouldn't recognize them, and it worked.
Apparently there are only 7.
Well, 7 or 2 plots. I come to the 2 plots, Stranger Comes to Town and The Journey. And
that's it.
Actually, my first novel was A Stranger Comes to Town, They Go on a Journey. So,
Wasting them by putting them together.
I know. Been lost ever since.
Patrick, you could probably pick that theme up, but can you also take us in another direction? How much are you using reality in what you're writing? And why are you an author? What are you trying to do?
Well, I'm an author because I want the world to be the way that I want it to be, and it rarely ever is. And when I was young, especially, I come from a very, very religious family, for example, and I always felt like a real outsider in it. And so I think that's a good position for a writer to be in, as the outsider. So you can just watch the world as it goes by and write down your thoughts about it without having to really participate, or as a way of participating. And so, I mean, I always wanted to write because it was a way of controlling things that I had no control over. And so I always wrote. I wrote when I was younger. I was younger than the people here. I wrote when I was a teenager. I got my degrees in writing. My first professional job was as a corporate writer. I used to write advertising and speeches and all that. And I did write my first novel, when I was about 21, 22. It was a pile of shit. So it would never see the light of day, thank God. But I got it out of my system so that I could write books that might actually be any good. And as for using reality, it's using social reality, which I guess is the topic of our whole evening here, and which was part of the competition that many of you entered. My strong opinion is that I think if you set out to write any kind of adjective novel, any kind of social realist novel, if you set out to write a satirical novel, if you set out to write a woman's novel, whatever. I think if you set out to write any kind of novel, I think you're setting out to write a mediocre novel. I think you need to just set out to write a novel. And there's a world of difference. Anthony talked about his book, which is excellent, and it is a lot about knife crime, but I mean, there's a world of difference between sitting down and saying, I'm going to write a book about knife crime, and saying, I want to tell a story about a kid who has to carry a knife because this happens, and there's another character who talks to him. One is a sermon, and the other is a story, and I don't think anybody wants to read sermons. I think they want to read stories. And so my book, which I think is probably the most fantastical of the panel, it's set on another planet, it's everybody can hear what everyone else is thinking, there's a talking dog. I didn't sit down at no point did I think I need to include this social issue or that social issue. My only concern the whole way through was, is this story good enough? Am I being entertained as a writer? And if I'm not being entertained as a writer, there's no way you're going to be entertained as a reader. So I have to be entertained. And I think that if you really are sensitive and stubborn and mule-headed enough to be a writer, then that says something about an artistic temperament that you're going to respond to the world anyway. And so any story that you're going to respond to and want to tell is going to have all that stuff in it. So when I was done, I could look back and see that it had a bunch of stuff about information overload, and it also features a knife quite heavily and about power. But the whole time I was writing it, all I wanted to do was tell a really good story, and the rest to me just follows. And I think that's the only way that I'm ever going to write a good book anyway.
That's brilliant. Wow. Food for thought. Okay, I have a long list of questions, but I feel as though I should at least give people the opportunity to ask their own questions. And if you don't, I'm just going to keep on going. So hands up if you want to ask questions, seems the easiest way to do it. And I'll point. Yes?
Joshua is my name. You were talking about speech writing, which is part of what I do, and seems like a useful point of reference for weaving in creative responses to social realities, as it's what politicians, amongst others, use. So, would you guys just like to discuss what you've seen in regards to Obama, seeing as that's a fairly obvious current Barack Obama. Because obviously one of his great skills is the fact that when he gives speeches, they're not sermons, they're very much stories or interwoven with such.
People might even disagree with you that they're stories. Elizabeth.
I don't think we do anything at all similar to speech writing, in the sense that speech writers write speeches for other people to say, or speeching. The art of oratory is something which is very, very different from writing a novel, because when you're writing a speech, you're inhabiting your own speech, you're speaking yourself, unless somebody else has written for you. When you're writing a novel, what you're doing is living in a world created of a whole host of different people. And while you're in the process of writing that novel, you're living in two worlds at the same time. It's a really weird experience, don't you agree?
Yeah.
You know, you get up and have breakfast, but actually, half of you is wherever it is your novel is.
I think there is a useful reference point, though, because it seemed to me that in a lot of writing for young people, there are, particularly perhaps of slightly earlier eras, and in particular in third-person fiction, there is a traditional author's voice that can often sound like a politician trying to sway opinion. When people give speeches, particularly politicians, they are making themselves, even though they may be talking about the future of a nation and the well-being of people, they're actually putting themselves at the centre of that story. It's really about them. And I think most writers of fiction know the danger of a story being too overtly about the author, other than in some of the more arcane literary experiments that perhaps you're familiar with, Anthony. Only as... yeah. Anyway, so I've always worked really hard to try and let the main characters in my stories do the speaking, and for it to be evident as early and fully as possible that the story is about them. And it would probably be a good idea if some politicians did that when talking to their constituency, and whether Obama.
But I would say that actually, although you're talking through a character, you're still the puppet master.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree with Patrick what he was saying about I write what Patrick said, in order to make the world the way he wants it to be. I'm kind of secretly incredibly controlling, and I want to lecture people about how the world really should be. But it doesn't come across as a lecture, I don't think, or a speech. But what you are the puppet master when you're creating characters, and all your characters, presumably. I mean, people. The way to most irritate a writer is to say, "So your work seems quite autobiographical," and all writers immediately go, "No, nothing to do with me at all." But in fact, I think most fiction is autobiographical to the extent that it's the writer's sensibility that is actually coming out in the various characters. So it may not be literally autobiographical, and I'm not really wild about literal autobiography or near autobiography in fiction, but you are creating a world which is the world as you would like it to be in some way.
I think political writing, I agree with everything that's been said, but I think political writing is advertising rather than, it has narrative, and there's of course advertising narrative as just there's political narrative. And Obama might use narrative in his speeches because there's something satisfying about listening to a narrative, but I think it's still advertising, it's selling a product. And even if it's a product that's good that you might agree with, I think it's still salesmanship, and you should always keep a skeptical eye to anybody who's trying to sell you anything. Because we're not trying to sell you anything. Except our books. Except our books, $7.99.
You did notice the table outside, didn't you?
I feel one point of connection, which is that Obama's best speeches can almost work like music. There's just a beautiful sound to his speaking. And occasionally that's how we write. We just try and produce a beautiful passage, and just a moment of music within our
Plus,
words.
you believe him and he makes you feel good. So, I mean, that's quite a good story, actually. It's not... Yeah, there is some advertising involved, but, probably good advertising makes you want to have something, and a good speech makes you want to have a piece of him.
He's a stranger who's come to town, so I guess it's...
Yeah, exactly. And he's on a very long journey.
Yeah.
It's a question just in the middle. Who's got a question? Oh, she's
shy now.
No? Sure?
Yeah.
Here, in the green cardigan.
Well, I'm not a speechwriter. I'm 14 years old and I'm still learning about emotive language in English. But I just wanted to know, like, when you write a novel and stories, do you write them to get through to people or to entertain them, or both?
Neither.
Both.
Neither.
Okay, 1 minute from this side and 1 minute from this side.
I've never had any success as a writer writing anything for someone else.
No.
When I've tried to write for other people, when I've tried to write what I perceive that they might want, it's been crap. Because there's nothing at the end. So, the lesson I had to learn through painful experience is that I write for a readership of one, which is me. If I'm liking the story, then there's a good chance other people will like it. And that's really it. It's hard to get to, but that's really it for me.
I quite agree with you. I feel the same. You get obsessed by a story. The story becomes you. You have to spend a lot of time writing it down. You don't care who reads it. Well, you sort of do. You do in a way. But actually, you don't write it for other people. You write it because you really desperately... Do you feel like that when you're writing? Is that how you feel?
I don't know, because when I'm writing, it's not really what you've all done. You've all written novels, really. When I write, I complain a lot.
You complain. That's fair enough.
Yeah, but that's because you're 14. That's it goes on for a while too. I was complaining till I was about 40. I think.
Can I violently disagree?
Yes.
My first two books are meant to be funny, and if you're trying to be funny, being funny means making other people laugh. It's no good if you just make yourself laugh and nobody else. So if you're
funny yourself.
No, but if you're a comedian, your success is judged by how big a laugh you get, not by how amusing you find yourself.
No, but when you're writing
so you're
something
constantly looking at, am I amusing you? Am I amusing you? If not, I'm going to change it.
But aren't you screaming with laughter when you write something funny yourself?
Well,
Because if not, it's not funny.
well, but sometimes that's a horrible thing, and you.
Okay.
And
Can you tickle yourself?
Comedies are bad? Do you know how the comedies are not funny? Because they're written by people who are writing jokes that they think other people. It's true. It's true. That's why they're poor. Because they're thinking, oh, they'll really like a poop joke here.
Okay, but then another thing is, that if you're an adult and you write a book that's just expressing your inner feelings, and what emerges is a children's book, then you should grow up, really, I think.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
If you're an adult, right?
I think
That's why I think that I write books for teenagers.
In denial.
I'm not grown up, definitely.
I'm beginning to feel as though there's not that much gap.
You wanted to
There's
fight.
not that much of a gap between academics and novelists at this rate. I can remember Paul Collier coming to talk to at the LSE, and he is the author of The Bottom Billion, so writing about development issues in Africa. And he got up on the stage and he said, he'd written a lot of books. That's what academics do, they write books. But this Bottom Billion was the first book that he had written for other people to read. And it struck a chord with me, because I think a lot of academics write just to work out for themselves how something works.
I would say, though, you can post-analyze all the reasons why a book is successful, why other people like your books. When I wrote my first novel, I had absolutely no clue whether anybody... I wrote ads for 15 years. Nobody ever understood them, and certainly no one ever remembered them. I mean, I thought they were absolutely brilliant, but nobody else ever got them. So when I sat down to write a novel, I just assumed that nobody would like it or buy it. And I was quite shocked. And I actually think that there's a huge element of luck involved. If what you happen to write, and what you want to write, happens to strike a chord with someone else, isn't necessarily... I could be a ballet dancer, but I don't think anyone would pay to come see me. But you know,
I'd pay, Meg.
So, well, yeah, he'd pay a lot, probably. That's he did. So, I mean, you know, there's an element of so many things have to line up. You have to be able to write. I think. I mean, I'm a style freak. I think you know, writing really well is really important. But you know, talk to Dan Brown. He doesn't believe that. Obviously, he wrote the Da Vinci Code, and he's a lot richer than any of us, and he can't write at all. So, you know, there are all sorts of elements that can make a decent book, and you know, in a way, the fun thing is to figure out the way that hasn't been done yet, and make a fortune with that. And in fact, there's a girl in Japan who just wrote a huge best-selling novel on her mobile phone, posting 10,000 words a day on a blog site, and the whole thing written on her mobile phone, sitting in the back room of her parents' house, and it was number 2 on the bestseller list for weeks. So, you know, no rules and no even reasons, I think, why something works or why people respond to it. You have to be lucky.
Good luck with your writing, anyway.
Other questions? Yeah, in the middle, in green again. Oh, a lot of you in green, yes.
No, further back, I think.
Further back. Yeah.
When you write your books, do you feel like your job is done after it's been published or after you've gotten an award for it?
After what was the second
After
bit?
you've gotten an award for it.
Do you have to
Received an award.
You have to be pretty lucky to win awards, I think. I mean, once the book, I don't know, for me, once the book is written and out, I try to stop thinking about it, because it takes a year from the time you finish the book to the time that it shows up in a bookstore. And, you know, an awful lot of books disappear in about 3 weeks, and you can't just sit there kind of hoping that it's going to win an award. You have to go on to the next one. In a way, you have to treat it like a job, I think.
Well, my next book comes out in May, and I'm already finished with the first draft of the one for after that. So I haven't thought about that book that comes out in May for a year, and I sort of have to, because I have to talk to people about it. I have to read it again to see what I wrote. But I mean, yeah, it's. I think for me, it's even just handing it into the publisher, the final version. That, you know, but that's not true. That's not true. The most satisfying thing for me as a writer is actually holding the copy in my hand, you know, between hardcovers and under a sleeve and all that on the pages.
But you open it up and there's always a mistake first.
But that to me was the top moment that really made me feel like a real writer, whatever that is, that I could actually hold it in my hand.
I think about awards quite a lot, especially this year, where about 4 times I've had to smile and clap as Patrick goes up and wins. So extremely annoying. Also, the children's book world is very different to the adult book world. There are loads of children's prizes, and it somehow, so if you don't get shortlisted, you feel it's a bit of a slap in the face. And so you shouldn't think about these things, but I think about them quite a lot. And also that they're a lot of fun. You know, writing's a lonely business. You sit in a room and you type. It's a time when you go out there and you meet your public, and it's
and you meet your other authors.
Other authors, yeah, and these are often really exciting, fun events, and so they shouldn't be important.
There are. I did a sum once, and there are only 238 people in the world who actually judge awards, and there are the many Children's Choice Awards. There are hundreds of thousands of children around the world who actually, and teenagers who actually get to vote for the books they read. Everyone I know who writes for young people doesn't really care too much, as long as they've got reasonable sales to begin with. Doesn't care too much about the 238 people. Cares a lot about the people we actually write the books for, and when they get a chance to give you a nod, that feels pretty good. But I actually would like to ban all awards, and I speak simultaneously as an award winner and an embittered and jealous award loser. I would like to ban all awards, because other than a little bit of marketing, a bit of a marketing nudge, they don't really do us authors any good at all. They divert our attention from where it should be, and it differs from author to author. I write my books for my main characters. I sometimes actually imagine them sitting down and reading their story, which I've helped them tell, and I've helped them have some of the experiences that become part of that story. Other authors visualise the whole process differently. Some apparently spend hours anxiously wondering if certain French philosophers are right, and the books are a meaningless collection of words that I think. 30, okay. I think the key. I think where your French mate maybe was getting his knickers in a twist unnecessarily was that if we assume that the books we write are meant to mean exactly the same thing to every person who reads them, they must be received in exactly the same way, then some of those points I think are very salient. But if we can relax, and it takes us control freaks a bit of an effort to let a little bit of control go, but if we realise that even forget the language, just in the spaces between the words and the ideas, there are an infinite number in every book of opportunities for every single reader to add some of their own experience. For example, I almost never in my books describe the clothes that the characters are wearing unless it's vital to the plot. And I've spoken to tens, probably hundreds of thousands of young people through my career about my books, and they've come up with many valid criticisms, but not one has said to me, Maurice, oh, and by the way, why do your characters spend so much time naked? And that's just a simple example of one of the magic things for me about prose fiction is that for every reader, for every one of us as readers, there is this constant invitation to add ourselves to the story, remake the story in all sorts of subtle ways for ourselves, and it means that we put out the story we've written for ourselves or our main characters, but we kind of know that it's going to be remade in all sorts of different ways.
That is a brilliant description of reader response theory, which was invented by Roland Barthes, my French guy. So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
I would say he didn't invent it. I would say he plagiarised it. He simply observed the practice that has been
I think we need another question.
You and your theory.
More questions? They're mostly girls who are asking.
Well,
it's quite pleasing. Hands up again. Sorry.
Girls are better anyway.
Well, now, the guy in the white shirt was had the first time.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. 3 rows back.
I know that some of you write for both teenagers and adults, but which age group is hardest to write for when you're writing fiction?
I don't know that it's harder. I mean, I find it. I've said this a lot because I believe it's absolutely true. I find it really, really liberating to write for teenagers because I think you're a harder audience to fool, and an audience that demands a bit more respect. But that if I can earn that, if I can do that properly and treat you with decent respect, that a teenage audience is more willing to follow me to faraway places. That I can take the story, I can really go anywhere I want to, because I thought, well, if I respect you, you're more willing to go with me, rather than if my book had been bumped into the adult world, it would have been stuck on a genre shelf somewhere, which I would have found really irritating, and most people would have looked at it twice. But it's read by all kinds of teenagers. I find it really, really liberating. I'm not just saying that sweet talking into buying it, but I really found that true.
I think there's far too much distinction made between adult and children fiction. I mean, if To Kill a Mockingbird was published today, it would be published probably in the children's list. Nobody would ever read it. And I think that we're actually, I don't want to sound boastful, but I believe we're living through a golden age of literature about and supposedly for young people. And Harry Potter and Philip Pullman have been picked up and read by adults, but there's a host of fabulous stuff out there being written that's not finding its way into the reviewers' list and not finding its way. Why should there be this distinction? You go into a bookshop and you find that children's books are upstairs where people have to struggle right at the very back of the shop, and you're passing tables and shelves full of books, and the so-called children's fiction is really apart. It's an apartheid. I think that's kind of false, because actually I think a lot of the books written for and about young people are infinitely better than the stuff that you're going to find on the adult shelves, actually.
Well, except there's a lot of rubbish children's books.
Well, that's true, Meg.
And there's a lot of rubbish adult books as well.
Adult books. Maybe what you should do in a bookshop is have good books and bad books,
Brilliant.
and really,
Yes.
really crummy books.
No,
And
I think
What if you found yourself in the wrong category though?
How do you overcome that problem? Because there are thousands of books written each year.
well,
And
actually,
yet when you go
80,000
to a
published
bookshop,
every year in Britain.
so few are pushed, and some of them are pushed really, really hard.
Especially if they're by Jordan, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, what do authors do about that? Make sure you get the right publisher.
I
Does
don't
it
know.
matter?
I have a kind of slightly cynical point of view. That I tend to think that really good books do get read, I think. I mean, talk to me in 10 years when my books have languished and they're down, nobody reads them anymore and all, but I think good books find an audience. There aren't that many good books around.
But does it work like movies, say, where some movies get all the publicity and, you know, the movies
Yeah, but there are
released
movies
at a
that have
particular time,
absolutely no promotion
and then there's a
suddenly
word
they
of mouth,
appear because,
slower burn.
It's always very quickly word of mouth. Even the huge opening movie with huge amounts of money spent, if the word of mouth isn't there, it just, falls
dies.
off after
Yeah.
2 weeks.
That's true, yes.
And the great thing about books is that because they cost so much less to produce than movies, they're allowed to kind of hang around a bit longer, and there's always that potential for that word of mouth. I'm beginning to sense, however, that putting knife in the title might be a really, good idea. I'm wondering that, you know, if Jane Austen, you know, Knife and Prejudice.
Next question. At the back, Bill. Sorry, about 3 from the end. No, stop. Down here a bit, yep.
Have you ever felt that it's difficult to find a legitimate voice?
Have you ever what?
That it's difficult to find a legitimate voice for a social issue that perhaps you haven't experienced firsthand?
Oh, God, yes. Yes. I have this problem because I keep writing books set in foreign countries. I mean, I've written books about Ethiopian street children and camel jockeys in Dubai and, you know, that sort of thing. Girls in war-torn Lebanon, and I feel agonized. I feel a complete fraud, and I worry about it all the time. And I think somebody's going to come up to me one day with a great big wag a finger and say, "You keep putting words into the mouths of all these people. Who do you think you are?" And I'll say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I will never do it again." But what can you do? I don't know. I agree with you. This is a big problem. On the other hand, if we had a system whereby we said only Ethiopian street children were allowed to write about Ethiopian street children, well, there may not be too many novels about Ethiopian street children, because on the whole, they can't read and write. So then, if you take that to a logical conclusion, you say, well, only women can write novels about women, and only men can write novels about men, and only 12-year-olds can write novels about 12-year-olds, and so on. And actually, I think really that it's the stories that count. It's true stories, or stories with truth in them, that count. And we just have to do our best to...
They are stories. This is the thing.
Stories,
I think
exactly, Maurice.
I think if any of us were to pretend that we were once Ethiopian street kids and that the book was, you know, an autobiography, but that there's stories, and I think, you know, most people who pick up books pick up fiction, understand that there's been an imaginative process by an author who is not the people they're writing about, and I've confronted some of these thoughts. A few years ago, I wrote a book about a couple of kids from Afghanistan and their parents coming to Australia as refugees. I'd never been to Afghanistan. I still haven't. I've never been a refugee. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a girl. One of the characters was a girl, etc., etc. And I think it's what we do, and it's what we should be allowed to do, and judge us on whether we do it well or not. But I think it is exactly what we do, and but it raises, I think, another question that I also think I'd love to see a bigger literature created by Ethiopian street kids, refugees from Afghanistan, etc., etc. And I think our culture would benefit by making that literature a bit more accessible to us all, rather than certain sort of well-known authors having to do it all the time. I want to keep doing it all, for my purposes, all the time. But when I wrote Boy Overboard, the story about the refugee family, I went to all my contacts in publishing in Australia to see if any of the many people who come to Australia from Afghanistan and neighbouring countries over about an 8-year period had written about any of their experiences, and if any of them had been published in any form. And other than a few sort of blogs, I couldn't find that anything had entered mainstream publishing. And I think that's a real shame. That's an area of our sort of shared discourse that I think the culture lets us down a bit there.
Well, the street kids, sorry, I just want to say one thing. The street kids I wrote about have actually, they were completely brilliant, because the gang that I got to know quite well in Addis Ababa went on to work with filmmakers, and they've been making a soap opera in Addis Ababa, which may or may not be on Ethiopian television, about their lives, and they kind of got inspired to get involved in telling their own stories and not being ashamed of them, which is what they have done.
Did you mean your question politically, or did you mean it sort of technically as a writing exercise? Did you mean it about writing, did you mean about the actual process of finding a voice besides who you are as a person, or the dangerous political waters of trying to write something?
Those that write about their own lives in a social circumstance get more publicity, they get more legitimacy in the eyes of the public. And so I was wondering if it's hard to write about something that you feel passionate about, but maybe you know already that it won't gain as much legitimacy as someone else who might experience.
Yes, it is hard. It is hard.
Well, there's a great example, which I've been trying to figure out how to get into this conversation all night. And I actually reviewed Morris's books on the Holocaust this weekend. And there's a book called Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I don't know if anybody's read it or not. I actually really loathe that book. And I've practically had fist fights with librarians over it, because I think the voice is so false and such a lie, basically. And not to mention the fact that the history is such a lie. But, lots of people read it and like it, and, what can I say? Just because the voice sounds incredibly inauthentic to me, it's obviously striking some kind of chord with other people, and the fact that I think that actually happens to be wrong is obviously correct. But, I can't, stand at every bookstore in England and stop people from buying it, so...
Can I just take a moment to publicly declare my undying love for
I'll get a room.
Whose review was one of the most wonderful I've ever benefited from, but I have to say it was a masterful piece of technical writing, because she not only reviewed my book glowingly, but she excoriated, I think is the word, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I actually have pinned your review on my hotel wall, and I've given it a title: Knife in the Striped Pajamas.
We've probably got time for a couple more questions. Right at the back.
There's a boy over there. Look, he's asked a question.
Oh, where?
Down second row, third row.
Okay, you're next.
John Boyd isn't here, is he?
Good evening. My name's Naima Colette, and I'm on the widening participation staff here at LSE. I just wanted to ask if you had any particular advice for our young students here today, those who are thinking about becoming authors, particularly in terms of subjects. Perhaps if they're thinking you need to do an English degree to be an author, or a journalist degree, for example. So I just wondered if you had any advice for our students here today. Thank you.
Well, let's go along the row with that, because but you must be brief, all right?
I think I have an English degree only because it gave me an excuse to write a lot. But I think when I talk to schools and things, the only three things you need to do to be a writer is, number one, write.
Yeah.
Because most people say they want to write, what they mean is they want to have written. You have to read, and you should always have a book on the go. Always, always, always. As soon as you finish, you need to pick up another one, because you need to cram your head with what people write. And three, you need to know how to rewrite. What you write the first time is not going to be perfect, and if you think it is, you're a bad writer. You always need to be able to rigorously read yourself and fix it, listen to the opinions of other people, and make it better. So
Well, except for Charles Dickens, who never, ever rewrote.
No, but he was a complete...
He published week after week after week as a newspaper serial. So you don't always have to be able to rewrite.
Unless you're Charles Dickens.
You do. You have to be able to rewrite.
Elizabeth. Okay, well, I'm going to copy you, actually, because I quite agree with you. I think read everything. If you like fantasy, read real life. If you like real life, read fantasy. If you run out of things to read the back of the cornflakes packet. And I think the next thing is write a diary, experiment, write bits of dialogue. I sit on buses listening to what people say and write it down because I want to catch their voice. They must think I'm completely mad anyway. And the third thing is live, experience things. Get out there. Don't just sit imagining stuff and look at computers. Live. Take risks. I know your parents won't like me saying this, and I know your teachers won't. Take risks. Go out. Do stuff. And be alive and travel and meet and talk to strangers. To hell with strangers. Talk to strangers.
But don't have sex with them.
Okay. Read, write, and live. That's my advice.
Like what she said. But what I'd say is that the one advantage of doing an English degree, I did 3 philosophy degrees, as you may have but the one advantage of doing an English degree is, you spend 3 years reading books. So in that way, it's good. But everything that's about life, everything else is great. So.
Morris.
I got 2/3 of the way through a degree in Yuletide services. I've got one word to say to you, and that is emotion, or its synonym, feelings. Particularly those of you from an Anglo background, bravely resist falling into that tradition of emotional repression and fear, because stories are about feelings. When we read fiction, we're usually encountering characters who are very different from us in all sorts of surface, cultural, and other ways. But inside them, we will only continue to read their story if we find something of ourselves inside them. And emotion is the universal language. We can be absolutely sure that every person on the planet who's not, more than 49% psychotic, whatever their circumstances and whatever their goals and aims and priorities in life, will share the same palette of emotions as we do. Every single person who will ever pick up what you write, you will know nothing about them other than that they will know what fear, jealousy, joy, love, anxiety, and all the other emotions are. So when you write, make sure that you're feeling stuff on every page. Not about is this good enough and is my spelling, but feeling what your characters are feeling, because that's what will keep your readers turning the page. That and a bit of French philosophy on the side, but mostly feelings.
Meg?
Yeah, I got this is actually true. I got a phone call yesterday from a guy I went out with about 112 years ago, and when he was 22, had been a guitarist for a really, really big rock band that toured all over the world. And he sounds a bit sad now because he's 50-something or other. And he hasn't been famous now for 30-something years. And I said, aha! I said, this is what I tell absolutely anybody who'll listen. Don't be in a hurry, because you don't want to peak at 21. And then have the rest of your life be a really, really depressing kind of, low sort of cruise into anonymity and depression. So take your time.
Okay, you get the last question. Now, actually, I've got one more at the end.
I'd be quite interested to hear each of the panellists say one of their favourite novels and why.
Favourite novels.
So
other than themselves or anyone here?
Yes, I think that's safest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Other than themselves or anyone here?
Only $5.99. Just
Meg?
This is my least favourite question, I always say to the person who asked the question, "What's your favourite novel?"
You can say one of those, by the way.
If you dare.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's a very hard question to ask. I have an answer. My answer is Pride and Prejudice, and only because I really love the structure of it. But I hated it when I had to read it in school when I was 16. It didn't mean an absolute damn thing to me. And I probably don't really have a favourite novel. My favourite novel is usually the last one I read, or something. It keeps changing.
Morris?
It's a tie for me between The Horse's Mouth by Joyce Carey and what is really a collection of short stories, which is really any of the first 10 or 12 collections of William stories that Richard Crompton wrote.
Oh, yes. That's how they got it.
My favourite book is not quite a novel, it's Gargantua and Pantagruel by Rabelais, because it's the rudest book ever written. It's the only book you'll ever read which features a giant wiping his bottom with a goose's neck. So that's my favourite one.
It is rude. It is very rude.
My favourite novel is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. But if you're under 20, promise me that you won't read it till you're at least 25. Otherwise, you'll spoil it for yourself.
I don't have a single favourite novel, so I won't say one. But I just want to say that if you are a teenager, you should read really inappropriate things. You should sneak books that your parents don't want you to read under their noses. I read fantastically inappropriate. I was a very unchaperoned reader when I was 15, 16, and I remember reading a Harold Robbins. I know, finding adults did the most astonishing things to one another. On a pure anatomical level. But for novelists, I like Peter Carey, Nicola Barker, and Ali Smith, who are all writers who break the mold. So that's what I like.
I know, I can tell by the shuffling, there are lots and lots of more questions. But the time has come to say who the prize winners are out of you lot. But before we do, can I just ask that one last question, just going along the row, one word. Pencil, pen, computer?
Depends.
Oh. Pencil.
Like Apple Macintosh computer.
My Apple Macintosh computer.
Well, we agreed at last.
Yeah.
Yeah, Apple Man.
God, I see I was born in the Stone Age, I told you.
Yeah.
A pencil every time.
Right.
Ta-da!
You really like...
Yeah, isn't it? Oh dear. Well, even though some people are not here, I am going to tell you everybody's names, whether they're here or not. ReaLITy, LSE Creative Writing Competition 2009. It's a pity I haven't got an envelope, isn't it, to open. For those of you, not all of you have been involved in this competition, but what we did was we asked Year 9 students, so people who are about 13 or 14, in London State Schools to think of a topic or an issue or a problem which concerned them, and then to come up with a way of creatively responding to it. So something in their home or their school or their environment, or something even bigger that they thought needed to be talked about. And then we asked the schools to send us their 2 top entries, so the schools were sort of funneling mechanism. And what we got was a selection of short stories, plays, scripts, poems, on an enormous range of topics. So from those that we received, we had a panel of expert judges, and it was chaired by Peter Florence, that Hay Festival man that ought to be here tonight but can't be. And included on our panellists, on our judging committee, was Meg Rosoff, who you now know better than you did before, probably, and Patrick Ness, the other end, and also Ali Smith, who I think you will all know of, but isn't here tonight. And what they did was pick 10 winning entries out of all those ones that we received. And the 10 winners will get £50 to spend at Waterstones, and a set of signed copies of all the books by our panellists here tonight, and, probably most excitingly, the chance to work on their creative writing with Ali Smith. So, not a bad prize, or not a bad set of prizes. Now, what the judges did was pick their 10 winners, and of those 10, judges can't resist this, of those 10 they selected 3 for special commendation.
So I'm going to, if you like, start from the bottom and work up. So the 7, Tom Gordon, actually, I want these people to come out and get their prizes because we've got them already, haven't we? Yeah. Tom Gordon, Elthorne Park High School. Tom Gordon. Yes. Next, Isabel Penaeus, and I might have pronounced that incorrectly, from Bishop Ramsey. Isabel Penaeus. No, she's not here. I have got a note. So we clap, clap, clap. Shannon Bowler Lopez, Greenford High School. Tamir Shanan, Greenford High School. Who we thought was here, but no? No. Sonia Paganuzzi, Ackland Burley. And then Ronan Mackenzie from Walthamstow School for Girls, who is not here. And David Okran from Cardinal Hinsley Maths and Computing College. Now, the 3 who got special commendation got their special commendation from each of the judges. And since Ali Smith is not here, I'm going to pretend for 30 seconds that I am Ali Smith. And I'm going to tell you what she said about this author. She said, a novelist in the making. Rather nice, eh? And the person about whom she said that, I'm building the suspense, I hope you... Eleanor Kerins from Colomo Convent Girls' School with a piece called All for Miranda. Eleanor Kerins. She's not here. She'll have to watch the video, but I couldn't say that at the beginning, could I? And then Patrick Ness is going to come and tell you who he picked. And then Meg will come and tell us who she picked.
Just very quickly, we won't prolong this. The one I picked was the one I thought was a really terrific and instinctive grasp of narrative, which is one of my most important parts of my writing, and that was Tom Marshall from Archbishop Tennyson School.
Oh, that's question.
You're supposed to ask beforehand how to pronounce the name of the person you're giving the prize to. But the one that I really loved was Laird Willoshan from Walthamstow School for Girls. Is she here? Yes? Is it Laird? While she's coming up here, I'll just say that what I loved about it was that Laird never actually said what the story was about, but you somehow knew anyway, and I thought it was a fantastically subtle piece of writing, and I'd be willing to say another writer in the making.
Well done. Now, if we all line up, you probably want your photographs with all these people, really, don't you? Yes? Yeah. Okay. We could say sit on their knees, but if you could just pause there. We'll take photographs in a minute, if that's okay. And troops, that's it. I think some of you, but perhaps not all of you, are invited to the top floor for drinks, but you'll know if you've been invited. For the rest of you, I do hope that you're staying around.
That's a metaphor for how the world works.
I do hope you're staying around for the weekend. And we've kicked off this event. We've kicked off the event very well. So thank you to all of you. And finally, last but not least, thank you to the authors.